So you want to know the things I wish I knew before I came to the Netherlands? Let's talk about it. One of the first things I really wish I knew before I came here that would have made my experience a lot easier was just what that Dutch directness means. So we've all heard the stereotype Dutch people are direct, right? They're in your face, they're very blunt, they are very no nonsense in a way. And I used to interpret that as quite rude maybe, or quite unfeeling. But I've come to learn that it's just that they are very efficient people and they don't want to waste time. But I can tell you, my first year here, there was a lot of friction and disconnect because my American nature sort of sweetness, plus the Arab background I come from, which is a lot more swerving around issues and pretending to be nice while talking behind people's backs sometimes if you're upset with them to spare their feelings, and sort of being very image conscious of how you project yourself to the world, made me come off as fake, even though this was just how I was. I'm very conscious of people's feelings, and because of the American influence that I had from consuming a lot of American media and being sort of this globalized individual, I just try to be very friendly, and I'm very much, hi, how are you, how are things going? Before I get into anything tough, to sort of diffuse the situation. And it was only until one of my really close friends who is European and along with another Dutch person were like, hey, sometimes you come off as fake, that I really sat back and thought, why is that? And I realized that maybe it's because of the no nonsense versus the sweetness. And believe me, it's something you eventually get used to. And when I talk to friends from back home, they all tell me that I've become a lot more direct and a lot more to the point, which means that it has influenced me in some way. And I'm happy to be a part of this community and to have navigated my way. Another point that I really didn't know when I was first moving here, when it came to dealing with Dutch people, was really how sometimes there's this facade that you need to talk to first and sort of deal with until you actually get to know the person beneath. Dutch people tend to be quite polite, despite even the directness thing. They tend to be quite polite. They tend to try not to offend, even though they tried their best to get their point across. There's this sort of, I'm gonna be polite but standoffish. I'm not gonna get involved. I'm gonna study the people around me, see who's interesting, maybe talk to them for a bit, but not necessarily be so quick to involve them in my life. I found that quite a turnoff in the beginning. I thought no one liked me or they didn't want to get to know me. But that's just because I'm usually a very open and theatrical person. What you see is what you get is what it is with me usually. But it's just like, it did hurt a bit. But then eventually I realized that once I got to know a few Dutch people and got super close to them, that that's just a thing people do. There's a bit of a cultural distrust of internationals. They tend to be seen as guests here sometimes. Like people are gonna come and work for a bit or leave, and then people are gonna come study a bit or leave. It's only when you decide to integrate and learn Dutch and show the effort of being involved in the community that you get welcomed in. And actually that's something that I got to exploring a bit and asked my friends about when I saw someone mention it in my comments and being like, there's distrust because of the people that came here and didn't integrate, and this idea that some people can leech off of the resources. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring this up with my friends, and I'm really glad I did because it brought up that point, and I think it's something that people really should be aware of. Something else that really sort of took me a bit off guard was the idea of how expensive it actually was, because I knew obviously living in Europe is expensive, but the Netherlands in particular, maybe because of the current housing crisis and the inflation that's happening because of the Ukraine war, has gotten super expensive lately. And what used to be considered reasonable before has come to be quite cheap. Like for example, a few friends of mine used to have studios for 700 euros. Now most people pay around 1,000. And the average grocery run, if you shop for a whole week, would cost you 40, now cost you somewhere between 65 and 70. So it's just, it might seem like small changes overall, but it adds up, especially if you come from a country where the exchange rate isn't as easy on the system. Like for example, for the Egyptian pound, I can say it used to be 22 pounds to the euro. Now I believe it's 28. this past week. So it's quite an intense jump. So that's something you need to be aware of, and definitely monitor those budget videos. And if you ever want me to talk about things like budget and more practical things, I'm happy to do that as things evolve, but be aware that you will be spending a lot of money. Obviously, there are ways to get around that. There are cheaper supermarkets, but for example, rent will most probably keep getting higher. Daily expenses just for food, even though those cheaper supermarkets are there, will probably continue to rise. So that's just something you need to be aware of, that if you need to make sure that your money is in order if you decide to come here. But luckily, there's also all kinds of support if you need it. I do know there are quite a few scholarships for internationals, for example. Haven't looked into them as much, but if you guys want me to, I'm happy to see if I can find out more about that. If you're finding my points in any way helpful or even entertaining, please don't hesitate to click that little bell down below and click the subscribe button so that we can keep connecting some more. We need to appease the YouTube gods so that I can keep creating great content for you. I think it's also important to do your research about the types of budgets. There are enough articles out there being updated yearly that will really help you when it comes to your salary negotiations of your first job, because a lot of people end up with less money than they're worth or than they deserve because they're international. They may not be as aware of the standards of living here, first of all, and also how much you're worth in the market. Like, depending on your degree and your skill, what you're looking for might really be in high demand. So do your research, check how much it costs, check how much you're worth, and try to line that up with your future employer if you happen to be someone who's here to come to work. Just make sure that you fight to get the life you need, because if you settle for less money, that might get to be a difficulty for you when it comes to living here. And I don't want to see anyone leave, frankly, because they couldn't afford it. That's why I made a video like this. This one's a bit of a doozy because everyone knows it, but I don't think people know how serious it can get. Dutch bureaucracy. Be careful with your documents. Be careful with your deadlines. Keep track of when your taxes are due. Make sure your registration is done. Make sure the apartment you're getting has registration in it. Believe me, if you don't, you will regret it. Fines, problems, challenges with your paperwork. And most importantly, if you're non-EU and dealing with the IND, keep track of your deadlines, because if you miss a day, you get a residence gap, and residence gaps aren't fun if you ever want to apply for permanent residency or even citizenship. One day can make a whole load of difference. Taxes will fine you, health insurance will keep track of you, and because the system is so well integrated here in the Netherlands, they have everything they need on you, so don't think you can get away with not paying something or waiting or being delayed. Just keep track of every little piece of paper you get and all of the organization you need to do, because otherwise the system is gonna be like, yeah, no, bye. A bit of a more serious point, because I really want everyone coming here to be aware of their mental health. Your first year can get quite lonely. As a student, for example, you can get quite lucky in the sense that there's a lot of intro events and places you meet people, and you're very heavily socialized in a university context. But as a professional or as an entrepreneur, you can kind of struggle to find community. There are a lot of spaces where you meet a lot of people, but partly because of that standoffishness a bit, mixed with the pre-established communities that are already there. A lot of people have their own friends and stuff. It takes you about a year to find the right people around you. I always say to my friends, your first year is going to be your hardest, and that's okay. You're gonna hate it, it's gonna be tough. You're gonna face the winter, especially if you're not used to Dutch winters. That can get quite depressing. And if you're getting used to a new way of working or a new way of studying, it all gets really hard on you and you get sad. And I remember hearing from my friends, oh no, I'm gonna go as soon as I finish my study and I hate it here. But now, 4.5 years later, some of them are still here. And it's only because they really found their people. And I can tell you, your people are here too. Whether you want to mix in with people from similar cultures to you, there are communities for almost every nationality. Or by interest, there are entrepreneurship groups and art groups and singing classes. And there's a lot of space for you to meet people. Just be open, be prepared, and just be yourself. Try to connect, and I'm sure there's someone out there for you. Another thing that it took me a while to realize is that you really need good equipment. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of Dutch people and people that live here end up using bikes. Getting a good quality, decent bike will be very helpful to you as a long-term investment. Now, fair warning, please keep it inside because these things do get stolen. But the weather sometimes will be very unkind to you, especially in the winter. So you need to be ready to navigate those streets as quickly as you can. And it doesn't help if the bike's a bit rusty or if the wheels aren't as strong or stuff like that. Also investing in good attire, so good winter boots, a heavy duty jacket for when the weather turns against you, and a decent umbrella. Sometimes the umbrellas do sort of fan out like that because the wind is so strong, but with a decent coat, some good boots, and a nice bike, you will survive the Dutch winter. I hope these were all pretty helpful to you. If you're really curious about life in the Netherlands some more, I do have quite a few videos about Dutch culture and Dutch culture shocks. Let me see you over there.